Hey everyone, Mr. Smith here. In this video, we're going to talk about something called the quadratic formula. So this is something that you might remember from Algebra 1. It's a big, ugly equation, and we are going to talk about how we can use it to solve quadratic equations. So real quick, just to recap, so far we have talked about factoring, we have talked about solving with square roots, and in the last video we talked about solving by completing the square. These are all methods of solving quadratics that we have done so far. Okay, those are the three that we have. Quadratic formula is going to be our last one, and the reason we need it is because of this. All right, so let's say I gave you this equation, I asked you to solve it. Well, I think factoring is the easiest method. So if you tried to factor it right away, you would need two numbers that multiply to 16 and add to -5. And you find out pretty quickly that there's no such pair, right? So that doesn't work. So let's think about our methods. We've got factoring, we've got square roots, and we've got complete the square. These are all of our methods. We just found out that factoring does not work. Okay? You can't factor this thing. All right, well, what about if we tried using square roots? Well, I've got an x squared, but I've also got an x running around. So if I tried to solve by square roots, I can't get the x completely alone because these two things aren't together right now, right? And there's no way for me to combine them without messing up the rest of the equation. So we cannot solve using square roots either. What about completing the square? Remember when in the completing the square video, I mentioned that a must be 1 when we use completing the square. So if you tried to divide everything by 2 in order to force that to happen, you would get x squared minus 5 over 2x plus 4 equals 0. And I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with a fraction. So you could do it. You could use completing the square with the fraction, but I don't want to do that. It seems kind of ugly. So completing the square is not a great option for us too. So if nothing works, here's what we need to know. You can always use the quadratic formula. I'm going to show it to you here on the next slide. You can always use the quadratic formula, okay? If nothing else works and you're trying to solve a quadratic and you don't, or if you just don't know what to do, if you're trying to solve a quadratic and you don't know what to do, you can always use the quadratic formula. It will always work. It's like your get out of jail free card, okay? So if nothing else works, fall back on the quadratic formula. It's like your last Hail Mary, get out of jail free card. It will always work. Here's what it looks like. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Maybe you learned a goofy little song to help you remember that, but this is what it looks like. It's big, it's ugly, but it's actually really, really helpful, and it's actually not that hard to work these problems once we get all the pieces together. And again, big thing to remember is that it always works. There is never a problem where the quadratic formula will not work. So you can always solve an equation using the quadratic formula. It will never fail you. All right. So when in doubt, run to the quadratic formula. All right. So here we go. Let's do some examples of this. I'm going to give you 2 examples in this video, and those are the only examples we're going to do. So before you do anything else, you first need to get your equation in standard form. So it needs to look like this. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So everything needs to be on the same side. So first you need to subtract 2 from this. You have 3x squared minus 5x minus 2 equals 0. And now you've got a, b, and c. It's all on the same side. So here's what the formula looks like. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Maybe you'll have that memorized by the end of the class. We'll see. So all you're going to do is take each of these pieces, b, a, and c, and put them into the equation. All right, so a is 3, b is -5, and c is -2. So let's go put all that in. It's negative b, and b is -5, so that's -5 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's -5 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is -2. And then this is all over 2 times a, which is 3. So this is looking kind of ugly. All right, here's the trick to actually simplifying this down. Do one thing at a time. Just break it up, do one piece at a time. You don't need to do all of this in one step. Okay, and I would recommend that you don't. Just break it up one piece at a time, and I promise it won't be that bad. So let's just go through it. -5 is 5, plus or minus the square root of -5 squared, that's 25, minus 4 times 3 times -2. If you just want to put all that in a calculator, go for it. 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 times -2 is -24. So it's minus a -24. And then that's all over 2 times 3, which is 6. And again, one thing at a time. Let's just continue to break it up and continue to try to simplify it. X equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus -4. If you subtract a negative, that's like you're adding. So that's 25 plus 24, which is 49. Over 6. Okay? And we can simplify that a little bit more. The square root of 49 is 7 plus 6. All right, so now at this point, remember what the plus minus does. The plus minus technically gives you two numbers, right? So this technically is giving us x equals 5 plus 7 over 6, and x equals 5 minus 7 over 6. So let's see what both of these end up being. 5 plus 7 is 12 over 6. And 12 over 6 is 2, so there's one of our solutions, one of our x-intercepts. 5 minus 7 is -2 over 6, and we can reduce that to become -1 over 3. So there's our other solution. Okay, so here are our two solutions, 2 and -1/3. So remember, when you get down to here, if we have normal numbers, we don't have any i's, we don't have any radicals, we can actually go figure out what the two solutions are. Okay. Plus minus gives you two possible solutions. So again, all we did was just broke it down one thing at a time. We paid close attention to our negative signs. We paid close attention to double negative signs. We made sure we didn't make any like simple calculation errors. And then when we got down to the plus minus, we found both of our two numbers. Okay. Let's do one more, and then that'll be it for this video. Again, we need everything to be in standard form at the get-go. So I want to put everything on the same side. I have 2x squared. I'd have to add 6x. And I'd have to add 7. And that's all ready to go. So my equation is -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Well, I've got a, b, and c. b is 6, so it's -6 plus or minus the square root of b squared. That's 6 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 7. And it's all over 2 times a, which is 2. Okay. All right, let's see where we go next. X equals, we're just going to do one thing at a time. -6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared is 36, minus 4 times 2 times 7. Put it in a calculator if you need to. 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 7 is 56. Over 2 times 2 is 4. Let's keep trying. X equals -6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 56, that's -20 over 4. We can keep simplifying. I have -6 plus or minus the square root of -20. Let's just go over here and simplify that real quick. We did this one in class. The negative sign I know is immediately going to become an I. I can think of 20. I got to use perfect square numbers, right? So we got 1, 4, 9, 16. Well, I know that 4 goes into 20. So I can break that up as the square root of 4 times 5. Think of that as square root of 4 times the square root of 5. And the square root of 4 is 2. So that's going to be 2I root 5. That's what that thing's going to break down to become. Okay? So it's going to be negative 6 plus or minus 2I root 5. That's what I broke the square root of negative 20 down into. And that's all over 4. Okay? One last thing. We're not quite done yet. Well, first off, I am not going to do what I did over here and break this up into the two different numbers. Because I've got that I and that root, I don't know what those numbers are going to come up to be. They're going to be super ugly decimals. So we can just leave it like this. But first, I want to simplify a little bit. I'm going to look at all of my terms. So I have negative 6. I have 2I root 5. I have 4. And I'm going to say, is there anything I can divide out of all that stuff in order to simplify it? Is there a number I could divide all of those coefficients by? Well, those are all divisible by 2, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to divide them all by 2 to simplify it a little bit. It's going to be x equals negative 3 plus or minus I root 5. I'm just dividing everything by 2 over 2. Okay? Simplified it by dividing everything by 2. And now I'm all done. There's no more simplifying that I can do. I'm not going to go figure out what these numbers are because it's an ugly decimal. So when it looks a little bit more ugly, I can just leave it exactly like that. Okay? And that's going to do it. All right. If you're still watching, good for you. You stuck it out. You get a little extra credit shot. So here you go. Here's a picture. Look at this guy. Oh, man. Here's what you need to do. You need to email me. Tell me, what movie is this from? And what is the character's name? What movie is it from? What's the character's name? Okay? Email me those 2 things. If you get them both right, I'll throw you some extra credit. Okay? We're going to practice this when I see you next time in class. Let me know if you need anything, and we will see you next time.